happily, I'm joined by Mohan, who is currently managing a national dementia research program called Emerald Lewy, funded by the Health Research Board, aiming to improve diagnosis and management for people with Lewy Body dementia. But also, of course, I should mention that she has a bachelor and master's degree in biomedical engineering. I should mention that she has a doctorate in communication sciences and disorders, specializing in auditory neuroscience and tinnitus. But she has abiding interest in brain health and communicating all that to the public, and we hope to discuss some of that. And so she is the co-founder of a creative workshop called Brain for Movement, which is teaching complex neuroscience topics to primary school children through creative movement. I have to say, when I first met her, she described herself not of any of these things, but as a dancer. So I take you as a dancer, all right. But I think you have shifted your focus from tinnitus and so on to be part of the Global Brain Health Leaders Scheme. Is that right? By the Alzheimer's Association, the Alzheimer's Society UK, and also the Global Brain Health Institute. So, and you have an office, as it were, in Trinity College there.
Yeah, that is correct. But I've not so much shifted my focus, Swamiji. I think it's an expansion of the focus, if you may, because there's quite a bit of research that suggests that there is a connection between hearing disorders and dementia. And so I've sort of widened my focus to look at brain health and its relationship with auditory disorders. So I've not left tinnitus. Tinnitus is still my passion, and there's definitely work going on in tinnitus as well, but more so widen that focus into the dementia.
Now, broadly speaking, for in kind of a lay audience, we talk about Alzheimer's, we talk about dementia as if we understood the whole thing, and we don't. So maybe a brief summary of what is the distinction between Alzheimer's and dementia. My understanding is that Alzheimer's is to do with proteins in the brain cells, that kind of thing, amyloid giving plaques and so on. And tyrus, as it's called, I think, which forms a kind of neurological tangle or something like that in the nerve cells, and causing damage and loss. But if you could give a nice summary, including, who might be at risk in terms of age range and that kind of thing.
So that's a great start. Alzheimer's is not the same as dementia. I think that's one of the first things that we should say. Dementia is more of an overarching umbrella term for loss of cognitive function. It can be thinking, it can be planning and executing tasks in everyday life, dressing. It can also be memory. It can also be other kinds of cognitive faculties that decline. I think it's best to begin with the thought and the concept that Alzheimer's disease is not the same as dementia. Dementia is bigger than Alzheimer's disease. Dementia is a broader overarching term for the loss of cognitive faculties, and that can be thinking, that can be memory, planning and executing everyday activities, washing, dressing, and just moving through the world on an everyday basis. But Alzheimer's is one form of dementia, and dementia is progressive, it's neurodegenerative, meaning that people will get worse by the definition of the disease itself. So Alzheimer's, as you mentioned, is one kind of dementia. It involves the accumulation of misfolded proteins, as you said, amyloid and tau tangles in the brain. So that's one kind of protein that can get misfolded. And the reason I think we have this conflation of the terms Alzheimer's disease and dementia is because Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. It affects about 60% of people with dementia, 60 to even maybe 70%. So another very common form of dementia is Lewy body dementia. And Lewy body dementia is a misfolding of other kinds of proteins called Lewy bodies. And Lewy bodies can accumulate in the brain, it can accumulate in the body. And so, depending upon where it accumulates, it has different kinds of symptoms. Lewy body dementia is also very different from Alzheimer's dementia. Um, Lewy bodies can start either as everybody knows Parkinson's disease. So it can start as Parkinson's disease. And currently, the research states that anywhere between 60 to 80% of people with Parkinson's disease can progress. They don't have to, but they could progress into having dementia. So, Parkinson's disease, as people know, is a motor dysfunction. People have rigidity in motor abilities, they are unable to walk, they have constipation, swallowing issues. But usually people don't present with changing cognitive faculties or dementia. But, it's good. So there is, after about 20, 30 years, people could present with cognitive difficulties. And this is called Parkinson's disease dementia. But sometimes these misfolded proteins called Lewy bodies can accumulate in the brain, and a lot of the symptoms don't involve memory loss. So, in Alzheimer's disease, one of the main symptoms is memory loss. It starts as memory loss, people forgetting the names of everyday objects, people forgetting to turn off the stove, or people leaving their keys somewhere and not remembering it, people forgetting the names of, and usually, oh, that thing that we put on this and we use it to clean our teeth. What is it? So that's usually, so they can't remember the name of toothpaste or they can't say toothbrush. So that's usually how Alzheimer's starts, with these loss of memories. But dementia with Lewy bodies or Lewy body dementia, dementia, especially dementia with Lewy bodies, can start with hallucinations, starts with delusions and changes in reality of the world. It can start with sleep disorders, people
So,
kicking in their sleep.
so if I can ask, is there any correlation with schizophrenic states and this?
No, schizophrenia is a completely different psychiatric condition.
Mm.
Schizophrenia is not neurodegenerative, so there is a loss of reality. There is a loss of people hear voices. People usually don't see things, but very commonly, but they can. And you've pointed out one of the major challenges that people, especially when they present with hallucinations and delusions, they go to a psychiatrist and they can be misdiagnosed to have a psychiatric disease where you've not taken other things into consideration. So one of the worst things that you can do for someone with dementia with Lewy bodies or Lewy body dementia is to prescribe certain antipsychotics, which can be quite fatal and can deteriorate people quite quickly. So it's important for us for especially clinicians to understand the difference between what general psychosis and psychosis due to dementia with Lewy bodies. And there's different ways of um, differentiating the two.
Okay. So if somebody is seeing the symptoms or relatives even are seeing symptoms of, let us say, dementia, what should they do? What is the first kind of
The
action
first
they should?
The first protocol is to go to a GP, and I think there's quite a bit of awareness within amongst general practitioners to spot signs of Alzheimer's disease for sure. Other forms of dementia that don't look like Alzheimer's is a little bit more tricky. But the first protocol is to go to the GP, and the GP usually makes a referral to a neurologist or a psychiatrist or a geriatrician, and then they take it from there.
Okay, so if we look at the Global Brain Health Institute and the programs that are going on there, what kinds of programs are going on there?
So the Global Brain Health Institute is a gift from Chuck Feeney. who founded who's one of the founding fathers of the duty-free stores across the world. So anybody who goes on the airplane and moves through duty-free, do remember Chuck Feeney and his contribution towards the society. And he is one of those people whose mantras is giving while living. And he is a great philanthropist who is not with us anymore. But Chuck Feeney founded many programs around the world, of which one of it is the Global Brain Health Institute, and we have sister programs in Trinity College Dublin and University of California in San Francisco. The Global Brain Health Institute is the goal is to train leaders across the world about brain health and particularly responding to inequities in brain health. Inequities in brain health can look like people living in very um, uh, desperate conditions, whether it is socioeconomically socioeconomically poor, or it is because of a lack of nutrition, or it could be people who equity doesn't always have to look through a socioeconomic or a societal lens. It could also be certain groups of people who may not be immediately thought of as having a brain health issue or having a risk of brain health issue. So it could be people who are living in well-nourished, who are living in upper middle class communities, but people who may have had a head injury and who look okay now, or people who have Lewy body dementia, or even people who have tinnitus, for example, and who have anxiety and depression, and who may not, and there's definitely a certain aspect of stigma around a lot of these conditions, which can prevent people from seeking help. And so people don't usually talk about depression, and these are not people who are in desperate socioeconomic conditions. So it's important to understand, or it's, for example, people who have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, and these are not necessarily conditions that happen in low socioeconomic conditions. But it's important for us to understand that brain health is not just about the brain, but it's a holistic health where the connection between the mind and or the brain and the body is very actively advocated for, and that it's not just some mass floating on the top of your head, but that it's connected with the body, and what happens in the body affects the brain.
Okay, now where does your dance come into this?
Dance is, well, there's different aspects in which dance comes into this. I think from a health perspective, dance is an aerobic activity. So, and dance, or there's very little understanding of why people want to engage in dance rather than engage in, let's say, a physical activity or a cardio activity. But we do see that people, when there is a certain social aspect to it, when there's an enjoyment aspect to it, people are definitely more inclined to stick to cardio routines, which improves heart health, which ultimately improves brain health. So there's a direct health aspect to it just because of dancing.
Hmm.
So dance is in another way, dance is also it's quite fun doing it. And there is we know that when you dance, it activates some emotional states. And when an emotional state is activated, there is a better chance of holding things in memory. So dance and creative movement also becomes a really interesting space that way for learning because you are activating these emotional states. So it can also be, and I'm a big advocate for using creativity and creative practice in learning in whether it's a school setting, whether it is in a community setting, whether it is for adults, whether it is with adults of a certain age. Um, it really improves and activates learning. And of course, there is the spiritual aspect of the mind and the body. For me, per se, as a dancer, it's really the spiritual aspect of it's a form of a meditation. It's really an avenue for me to elevate them.
Now you have a kind of an art project going on there with a small group of people. Do you have an overview of that
Absolutely.
project?
I mean, there's a few people, there's a few art projects which are going on, especially with Emerald Louis. One of it is called the Keepsake Chronicles, where I mean the people who are curating it's common knowledge, and currently there's an exhibition going on in St. James's Hospital. So Keepsake Chronicles is storytelling of the lives of people with Lewy body dementia and other forms of dementia. It gives a voice for the person with dementia. Usually, it's a voice that's not heard. The care partner usually talks for the people with dementia because either there's a big stigma and there's a huge misunderstanding that people with dementia are not coherent. They're not talking sense. There's a lot of misconception around it. So Kate Irving, who's a professor of nursing, Alex Kornhuber, who's a photographer and fellow of the Global Brain Health Institute, and Kathy Foley, who's a poet. They've created this program called Keepsake Chronicles, where Kate curates the entire thing and she takes care of the ethical aspects of things. Kathy interviews people with dementia around, and she sort of probes stories around a keepsake object that they bring with them. And Alex is sort of in the background taking pictures of these people while in the movement, while they're telling their stories. And Kathy uses this particular method called found poetry, where she writes poems from the words of the people, the words from the interviews. And then there's this beautiful combination of a photograph of the person, a photograph of the object, and the poem that becomes a keepsake by itself. And so there's an exhibition of this going on in St. James's Hospital, in the Mercer Institute of Successful Aging. It opened last week and it will go on until July 24th. So if people want to go see what this looks like, they can definitely go see this.
And in terms of the participants, what impact has it had on them?
Oh, it's gorgeous. I mean, it's especially with people with Lewy body dementia, saying communication through words is a big challenge. So usually they don't talk much. You have to give them time, but they're very present. They're very different from people with Alzheimer's because they're very conscientious. They're very present. The person, even in very quite advanced stages of dementia, the person is still very there. In Alzheimer's, it's possible that the person has transformed into they don't know who they are, they don't know who the person is. But with Lewy body dementia, they know who they are, they know the relationship with the other person, but they just don't have a voice because of their challenges. So, especially for this person, it was beautiful to see people come alive with their stories, and you learn about people outside of their disorder. There's a person who was a clinical psychologist who funded their clinical psychology program by playing music in a band. There's another person who was a chef. So you can see them reminiscing about their past and about their lives, and there is a contribution of knowledge. There's a whole wealth of knowledge in their lived experience, and for them, it's a they feel this moment of sharing their stories, which is not related to their disease at all, and this moving away of this identity that people in the society see them as people with dementia, but there's so much more than people living with this condition. And there's whole lives and rich lives that they've led. And they feel really happy about sharing these stories about their lives outside
You
the.
mentioned the connection between hearing loss or hearing difficulties, tinnitus, and the onset of dementia or the condition of dementia. Why do you think that might be, or is the jury out on that?
There's much more of a connection that is fully not understood, but definitely evidence for, is between hearing loss and dementia. Um, because there's multiple different reasons for it. One is that structures of hearing in the brain are directly connected to structures of memory. which is the hippocampus. A lot of people would have heard this term hippocampus. It's a seahorse-shaped structure which holds memories and stores memories. And one of the regions that gets severely disintegrated in Alzheimer's disease. So there's a direct connection to it. So with hearing loss, when you're receiving less input, less sound to the brain, the connection between the two can also get degenerated. So that's one of the reasons that people think that this might be happening. Another cause is also that with hearing loss comes social isolation. You remove yourself from the society a lot, which can also have a really strong impact on the brain. So these are a couple of reasons why or how this might happen, but there's a lot of research that's going into it. The relationship between tinnitus and dementia is not fully clear. We're not very sure if there's a link, but with people with severe tinnitus, you see that they have anxiety, they have depression, they have changes in attention and cognitive faculties. So it might be an indirect way that it may be related, but we don't fully understand. There's no data showing that there's any risk. There's not data showing that there's a link, but that's where the research is now moving towards, is to try and understand with
Mm.
people, especially with tinnitus, who have hearing loss. Is it the hearing loss? Is it the tinnitus? Or what may be? But that's ongoing research.
And is there, in your understanding, a link between, and I'm going to include Alzheimer's and dementia as well, although they're different, but
No,
is there
so
any?
Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. So dementia is
Yes,
kind of the overarching term. Yeah.
yes. So is there any proven links or data that relates general health conditions in most cases, to these conditions?
Absolutely. So if you look at, so there are about 14 factors that have been identified in different stages of life that pre pre that may present a risk of developing dementia. Whether it's Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, it doesn't matter. So general, all cause dementia, as they say. And some of it is definitely, and I can send you a picture of this if you want to add it into the talk itself, into the podcast itself. So there are about 14 factors, of which cardiac health is a big one, is a big one. So hypertension, diabetes, blood pressure, and physical activity. So lack of physical activity is a big, big factor into which can be modified. So if someone has not developed dementia, then it is possible to modify. These are modifiable risk factors. Diet is a big thing. Hearing loss is a big thing. So protecting your hearing, protecting our vision, and mental health. So depression, anxiety, existing conditions can also pose a risk of developing dementia. So really, sort of a holistic whole mind body approach to managing stress, eating well, eating healthy, wholesome food, eating well, exercising well, and keeping keeping cholesterol, blood pressure, and diabetes under control, taking care of our senses, because our senses is really the gateway to the world. So taking care of our hearing, our vision, and also one of the things that doesn't get said enough is social community and social connection, and really building that social connection and meaningful social connection. It's not just I have, oh yes, I have about 1,000, 2,000 followers on Instagram, or 1 million followers on Instagram is not really what we're talking about here, but really quality social connections where you go engage and do something meaningful is also one of the ways of at least to an extent. Of course, there's a genetic risk for dementia. There's other risks for dementia, which is non-modifiable. Age is one of it, but it doesn't mean that just because someone is 80 or 90 or 75, it doesn't mean that they have to develop dementia. Dementia is not form of normal or healthy aging. It's definitely outside of healthy aging. Everybody doesn't have to develop dementia. But at the same time, dementia is not also it has a certain image. It's also not a disease of the elderly, if you may. There's young onset dementia is definitely on the rise. People who are 45, 40, 35 even show very early forms or very early signs of dementia. So the age of dementia is also coming down as we speak. So it is important to keep in mind that dementia can happen to anybody. It can start at any time. There's a genetic risk to it, but at the same time, there's also a good preventable component to it. And the Livingston paper, and I'll send you the image, is an image that is ingrained in everybody, where you there's a possibility of preventing it up to about 40%. So
Now, what
there's a
is the
lot that we
impact?
can do.
Yeah, what has been the impact on you personally in working in these areas, and also the impact on others?
For me personally, it's a big warning sign. Every time I eat ice cream, I feel a little bit guilty. But of course, that's not the case. But it's really a call to it's really a call to take care of my body a little bit better, eat healthy and move. And that has been it's something that keeps coming back to me over and over again. But of course, we fall into these everyday activities, and people lead stressful lives because we're all very busy, especially at this age, especially between 30 and 50. People are extremely busy. They have children. We want to do something meaningful with our lives, and so it gets really hard to think about nutritional balance and balance of physical health and mental health. But it is something that is a calling for me to take care of myself. Um, with respect to others, I think it has really opened up my mind in terms of knowing that people can have challenges. Dementia is a health challenge, but at the same time, it doesn't define a person's identity. Just because someone has dementia, it doesn't mean that we're losing this person. Their cognitive faculties, there is an aspect of degeneration, there is an aspect of care, there's an aspect of burden of care that is not talked about a lot. But it doesn't mean that this is the end of the life of this person, because people with dementia lead full lives. It's not a hopeless condition in the sense that there is a lot that the family and the person can do together, and there's ways of coping around it. And the arts become a very central way of coping around dementia. So that
Now,
has
we
been.
we 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 met in a very different environment first,
Mm,
and so of course I have a certain outlook on these things,
mm,
um, and so a certain kind of philosophical attitude, it seems to me,
mm,
would assist others, not directly telling them about a certain approach in life or worldview, but just by your demeanor, by your behavior, by the outpouring of compassion and things like that, you know, um, other people in this area might not have those kinds of qualities. So, in your view, where does all this kind of fit in?
when you mean this field, I don't know which field we're talking about.
No,
Um,
the field that you're in,
okay. Hmm.
which is partly to do with communicating, interacting, research, um, assisting people in an indirect way, and so on. So all of this key area of interest,
Hmm.
serves to assist people, no doubt. Particularly this project that you have, this exhibition which is currently going on at St. James Hospital. But I think probably in the health and wellness sector, and this is not directly in the health and wellness sector, but it has it's
Mm.
involved. Uh, is there a certain approach that would be helpful for people who are doing what you're doing?
Okay. Wow, it's a very deep question. I think for me, my practice has been, I think there's a lot that I have learned from Vedanta and from the sort of discernment and detachment to ego that has really helped me navigate this space. And honestly, I think there's a lot of of outpouring of giving that has also come from, of course, people who I work with, who are my seniors in terms of, people in senior management and leadership, have also shown this sort of giving while living and really walking the Feeney way, as we would say in the Global Brain Health Institute. I think for me, the important thing that I keep in mind is that I'm not trying to fix people. I think I'm not trying to heal people. I'm not trying to fix people. I think either in the health and wellness area or even in the medical sciences area, especially with dementia, one of the things that I have learned from clinicians who are good clinicians, they're good clinicians. I mean, everybody's trying their best. But I think from the people who have a very in-depth knowledge about dementia is really about letting go and letting people and providing space for people to live in the moment and what best we can make of this moment. And there's a certain aspect of dealing with uncertainty because with dementia, there's no cure. So you can't make this person better. There are disease modifying therapies that are now coming, which can slow down the process of dementia, but you cannot cure dementia. Dementia, once you have it, is something that's inevitable. The person is going to decline, the person will lose faculties, the person's families are going to suffer in the sense of that it is going to get worse. So there's nothing much that you can do about stopping or curing this person. So all you can do is step back, provide a space, and really separate the ego of I and really think about the other person. And and that is something central that I have learned and which also is something that I carry with me in other walks of life. And so this sort of healing or fixing this person is out, and it's really about that, creating that space and just being there for the person and understanding who this person is and really looking at a person's life outside of a condition. It can be dementia, it can be depression, it can be disability, it can be anything, it can be any form. Everybody has a challenge. It can be trauma. Some disabilities you can see, some disabilities you cannot see, but everybody is living with a challenge. And it's really about understanding this person outside of this challenge or with the challenge and kind of bringing this holistic view and just being there for this person as the person needs and meeting them where they are at that given point of time.
But I think you struck on, well, a couple of things. Firstly, it's a good philosophy, giving living. That is a good, wonderful dictum, regardless of the circumstances. But also the idea we can never really help somebody. Our view would be, well, we can serve on the basis of a fundamental philosophy of holistic approach. Holistic being more than just material holism, that is there, of course, but more deeper than that. At the spiritual level, which is the most fundamental level from our point of view, there is not only holism, there's oneness.
Mm,
So that when you understand that, the whole approach can change. And also, in our view, it has an impact without intending to do it. What we see as any of these conditions might be incompleteness, we might describe it.
mm,
And when you assert a completeness as a kind of attitude of perfection, the perfection, according to the deepest practical philosophy that we has its impact. Now, people might call that spiritual healing. They might call it they might call it miracle or something like that. If we take the accounts of Jesus, for example, then we might say, oh, there's a miracle going on. But I don't think that's from Jesus' point of view. That's from the observer's point of view, external observers. From his point of view, he only saw the perfection. And if he was the embodiment of pure love, that love comes through and has its impact, even if it is on the social level. And all the understandings, the empathic understandings that you brought up, because of, as you said, there's a social dimension to this, there's a physical dimension to this, there's a neurological dimension to this, and there is also the idea of not understanding from the person's point of view, because what does it feel like? It applies to any condition if you don't have it. What does it feel like to have this? Um, these are some of the approaches that our philosophy helps to deal with.
Absolutely.
And we have,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, there are vast institutions dedicated to social works and so on, and social and educational works, philanthropic works and so on. But we don't take it as philanthropy.
Mm,
We take it as an opportunity, a privilege actually, to recognize the divinity there in the other, and with that attitude, do whatever's necessary, whatever the
mhm,
natural response is to it. I, of course, deliberately involve myself in naturopathy.
mm,
And so in taking measures, preventative measures, if you will, for any
mhm,
conditions such as this. Um, the naturopathic approach, which could also be called the yogic approach,
mhm,
assumes that things are well. It
mm,
doesn't assume the opposite. It
mm,
doesn't assume things are bad and we have to correct it. It
mm,
assumes things are good, perfect as they are. We didn't notice it. And when we reach out with compassion and penetrating vision and get to the essence of what is the other person and what is nature itself, we have every confidence that nature knows exactly what it's doing.
mm,
And without our interference. In fact, when we interfere, we create a discord. Nature is working in perfect harmony. It doesn't judge things in terms of harmony and discord. Part of its overall harmony is the pluses and minuses of it.
mm,
We had an earlier discussion, why do earthquakes happen? And well, why not? The nature is like that.
yeah.
It's rough. It's not meant to be smooth. Otherwise, there's no contrast. And in the moral and spiritual life of a person, without that contrast, you don't know what's good.
Mm,
You don't know what's moral. You don't know what we should be doing.
mhm, mhm,
So all of the background to all scriptures, regardless of religion, will be to assert there is a difficulty somewhere, but it's not inherent. It's just on the surface acting as an obstacle. But from the divine point of view, there are no obstacles actually.
mm,
So we just didn't view it from God's throne, if you want to put it poetically. We looked at it from our point of view.
yeah.
So with that, I would assume that if it's consistent with our philosophy, that assists in people who have this condition of Alzheimer's, dementia, and any allied thing. Um, so the body knows what to do if left free. I suppose the difficulty is that our way of living, our life
Mm,
style,
mm,
is such. And when I say lifestyle, I'm also talking about the approach to life, how we view life.
mhm,
And the way we view life is increasingly stressful. And stress
mm.
has an immediate impact on us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's increasingly stressful because we are much more in touch with the world news and the goings on around us. We're not sitting in blissful ignorance of whatever it is. Thousands of years ago, people would be blissfully ignorant about the wars in Gaul,
Mm,
you know, the Gallic Wars and so on, and the brutality happening there. So there's nothing new in human behavior, although you would think there was, except that it works in both ways. That is, that we are also seeing things such as you've mentioned,
mm,
that there's an increased understanding, that there are new methods that can be employed, that there are more enlightened understandings of it, as opposed to maybe 100 years ago, where maybe people suffering from Alzheimer's would have been put into a mental institution or something.
it's
Uh,
it's very possible, and I think a lot, and we've definitely taken a lot of strides in, at least in terms of Alzheimer's, to and in terms of dementia even per se. as an overarching term. We don't fully understand what dementia looks like because it's so different. Because Alzheimer's looks a certain way, Lewy body dementia looks a certain way. There's vascular dementia, there's frontotemporal dementia. So all of these different kinds of dementia look different. Plus, we have this image in our head that dementia is for an older person. Parkinson's is an older man who has a walking stick, but it doesn't have to be. They're very young women, particularly a person who's a big advocate for women having Parkinson's disease, not necessarily dementia, but just Parkinson's disease as is, and who was diagnosed with Parkinson's when she was 32, before she had her first child, or maybe the second child, but before she had a baby. So I think it's important for us to understand that there's to remove this misconception of this image that we have in our head, which is also fed a little bit by media as well. So that it's not necessarily an older person's disorder, but younger people can have it as well. It's not necessarily a man, women can have it as well. Um, so I think it's important to understand this bigger picture, and that it's a brain condition. And I think there's a colleague from the art world who told me, Anusha, I think it's really important that people understand this is not just a mental health thing, but it's a brain health thing, that the brain is actively degenerating. It's exactly like heart health, that the heart is a pump and it has mechanical difficulties. In the same way, the brain is an organ where it can lose its cells, and because the brain loses faculty, that people's behavior is different, and the way people present is different. It's not willpower, it's not something that people can control. And so I think that all of that brings a certain level of understanding that, okay, this is an actual thing that happens in the brain, and not just, oh, they're behaving a certain way because they are just inappropriate. It's
But of
not like
course, during our conversation, you did use in one sentence
mm.
uh, brain mind.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
I did. I
And
did. I did.
I picked up on that a
I
little bit.
know, I know.
So, because that's a huge issue, of course,
Mm,
which involves a whole new kind of science that incorporates neurology, incorporates psychology, incorporates philosophy,
mm,
consciousness studies, and so on. But what you've highlighted is the fact that the brain is a physiological organ like any other organ,
hmm
a highly complicated computer-like entity, which actually is not just solely contained in the head, because if you want to detach the brain, you'll have to sever the spinal cord as well, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a whole sympathetic nervous system that goes with it.
hmm
And so, of course, our philosophy would be founded on the idea that consciousness is a foundational thing. Consciousness itself is the source, and free will at the source is also the same as consciousness, but not in a local level. In other words, in you or me,
Mm,
but it is a foundational thing from which everything comes. And when that particular cosmic mind, if you want to call it that, makes its free will decision, we then have the mystery of what's called decoherence is solved. In other words, at the fundamental level, we have this most reliable physics, which is the quantum field theory. That quantum field theory provides us with the most reliable and most tested physics theory ever, and that puts us in conflict with the physics of tables and chairs and bodies
mm,
and this and that and the other. And how does it transfer from one to the other? If you take consciousness as a foundational thing, it solves the problem, because the free will, really the foundational free will, expresses itself. And we use the language quantum fields.
mm,
And so quantum fields, that is what people are. People are, in fact, consciousness as quantum fields, and then expressing themselves Now, the ancient people knew all of that, of course. So the ancient yogis and Sankhya philosophers and so on, they had that language, and they called it mere elements, what we call quantum fields now, which exhibit a combined wave-like characteristic, undetected, very subtle, not undetected, but it comes out as the solid things, as solidity, as liquidity, couched in the language of earth and water and all the rest of it, radiance and fire, and so all of these kinds of things were worked out, except probably nuclear forces. They didn't work that much out. But nuclear forces probably come within electromagnetism anyway. Anyway, we'll see. So they worked this out a long time ago, but the foundational thing was, and they never made any confusion between the connecting organism, the instrument, which is brain, and that which is behind it expressing through it. And so they made sure that they understood that states of consciousness, although had their observed effect on wavelengths in the brain, for example, we have all these various waves, alpha and delta and all the rest of it in the brain, but you can bring them into states of consciousness called waking dream and dreamless sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And they registered this early on to say, okay, these are expressions of consciousness in an objective way with subjective consciousness sitting behind. Nowadays, when we talk about subjective consciousness, it's not really subjective. They're observed qualia, they're observed feelings, for example. The feelings come up and you can say, I felt sad. Well, you observed it, I felt happy. Well, you observed it. Okay. Who's the observer? So the question about consciousness is who knows it? So when the organ has a malfunction, as it were, we won't be surprised that the outlook is different, that what we see and feel and touch and taste is different as well. We know that. We know that you can block off certain sections of the brain, if you will, manipulate that. For example, in epilepsy, there's a certain area of the brain that seems to have a different effect during
Mm-hmm.
epilepsy and things like that. So I think some people within physiological science, well, not necessarily physiological science, but you can say that the philosophy of science have taken the materialistic view that consciousness is an epiphenomena, a product of the brain. And it kind of looks like that. It's like saying that light is the product of a light bulb.
I see. I understand what you're saying. I see what you're saying, but I think the question for me then as a scientist is, so for a person who has um, a change in reality and a perception of change in reality. So from what I understand, if I understand what you're saying correctly, to take the ancient approach of first telling other people the summary of what I have understood and then presenting my argument. So if I understand what you're saying, Swamiji, you're saying that the brain and the fruits of perception through the brain, whether it is thoughts or feelings or the perception of the external world. However, the fruits of the perception or the expression of the world through the brain, there is the cosmic consciousness that sits behind it, that is observing this change in or the fruits of the brain, let's say, for example. So when a person says, I feel sad, then the idea is that I am not the feeling, I am not the thought, but I am the person who is observing feeling sad. So I is not me, Anusha, as an ego, but as the cosmic consciousness who is
Yes,
observing.
there's a reason why we say my thought.
Correct. So I have summarized that well,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Okay, good. So now when a person is undergoing a shift in reality, say that they are saying, oh, I see an animal walking in my room, and they believe that it is real. or they smell something that's not there, see something that's not there, feel something that's not there, and they actually believe that it is real,
Hmm.
then what happens to the I, the cosmic consciousness I?
Yes. So the world is a product of it. And when we take these three states of consciousness, of course, dream consciousness is one of them, and it relies on image making. Now, you can argue philosophically that this whole world is a product of our imagination, because what's happened is we've used our interpretive faculties, the sense organs, and the mind. What we call the mind in this case uh, is not the brain necessarily. The brain is incorporated in it because the brain is part of the physiological senses, but the mind is as material as the brain, and there we find different segments of it. So the one, if it wasn't like that, if it was truly our own identity, we'd never be able to make any judgments, and we'd never be able to control it. We'd never be able to control passions, for example. We'd never be able to make decisions and have an executive faculty function. So this whole world really is a product of our wrong interpretation because we are dimensionally deficient. Now, when you change that, you'll see things also differently as well. So we can imagine many things and take it to be real. In a sense, we're taking this whole world and we're taking it to be real as opposed to being apparent. That's our problem. So
Mm-hmm.
when we only take it as apparent, then how would we view the world in a practical way? Well, it doesn't mean to say we don't deal with the world of tables and chairs and what have you, but what it means is that we also see it from the fundamental physics point of view as a play, in this case, of divine waves, which are there. And our only explanation why should it exist would be it's a kind of drama or a kind of play. And we can imagine many things. For example, if I suffer from paranoia, I can imagine there's a ghost behind every tree.
Mm.
If my state of anxiety is so acute and astute, I can imagine many things. I can imagine that every person I meet is my enemy,
Mm-hmm.
and so that becomes difficult for me. But behind it all, somebody is observing it, not only in one state, but the whole of the hallucination goes in a dreamless sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Just as the whole of this world disappears in a dreamless sleep. And the whole thing disappears when I get absorbed into the essence, which when observing is called the witness. When not observing, we can't call it witness, we can call it essence.
But there is, so the part that I don't understand is that when there is a change in cognitive faculty, even if we consider the mind as a material um, effect of the cosmic consciousness, how does the plugging in of our material consciousness with the cosmic consciousness work or look like when our material consciousness is um, is disturbed in the
Mm,
waking world?
mm. All of our waking world consciousness is disturbed. That's
So,
why
but
that's why we don't think we have peace. We think we have all kinds of disturbances and problems and difficulties. That's our interpretation of the world, simply because the waking ego only appears in the waking state. That waking ego is only concerned with other people, places, and events. And behind it is a survivalist attitude which says, I have to preserve this thing called I, consisting of a body and an assumed individual mind, and I have to protect it at all costs. That creates then a strategy. Part of the strategy could well be delusion. In fact, of course, it's delusion in a general sense, but in a more specific sense. So,
so
yeah.
so
So it's,
change in
I give you an example. Um, my light bulb is flickering. giving me a distorted view of things. Okay, the electricity that sits behind it is not at fault.
Mm.
It's the instrument which is at
So
fault.
can we say that, so from a disease perspective, from an understanding um, of what is changing in this person, from a health perspective, actually, let's
Mm.
not say from a disease perspective, from a health perspective, changes in behavior, changes in reality, um, changes in consciousness, in the sense that um, because especially when I think of Lewy body dementia or schizophrenia, Lewy body dementia being degenerative, schizophrenia being non-degenerative, that there's an element of change in what is reality. And there's also, it's not just about the change in reality, but also the effects of it, that there's harm that the person can incur on themselves, especially with Lewy body dementia. There's a lot of suicidal ideation that comes in. So changes in reality becomes quite distressing for the person and for the people around them. So from a medical health research perspective, I think that it is important for people to understand that this is essentially a trigger for people to go seek help. But if we put this in a wider spiritual context, a person having changes in reality or changes in cognitive faculty is also an expression of the divine, is
Yes.
also an expression of the cosmic consciousness, which, as a person, if I were to translate this to a practice, for me, this sounds as a point of destigmatization and inclusion within the wider society, that this is a person who has changes in cognitive faculties. Yes, we have to seek help, but from a wider spiritual context of inclusion in a society, this is also an expression of the divine who has chosen to express themselves or express itself in this sort of change in faculty, which means that they are people with changes in reality, changes in altered perception, are also very much part of our waking world, where it's just a different expression, it's just a different form. Was that is that operational enough? Does that sound operationalized enough? Because I think the difficulty, what I feel, and I think for me as a practitioner, is I think it's important for people to understand from a practical standpoint that this is not, because there's a lot of things where people, especially with schizophrenia, that, oh, I am speaking with God, is a very, or I feel, I hear this voice that is, that is asking me to act in a certain way. And I think it's really important to tread that line carefully and say, where, no, this is not okay, that this is something that a person has to seek help for. But from a societal perspective of shunning these people away and institutionalizing these people, from that perspective, i would I would sort of go back into thinking that, no, from a spiritual angle, they are also as much of an expression of the divine as we are, or as the rest of us are, who don't have this change in cognitive faculties, don't have a change in perception of general reality as
So
is
we
from.
have to deal with people on every level, but not forgetting that the foundational level is pure spirit.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
I
seeing then what else has to be done. Okay, so the just to use the simple example of driving a car, you see, if the car has a mechanical failure, you take it to a mechanic,
yeah.
um, and same thing. But the driver, of course, is a sentient entity in the example, in the allegory, and so it is the driver that makes the decision. Let me do this. Let me do that. And if the fault is in the instrument, then we have to attend to the instrument. There's no doubt.
Yeah,
But it is always important to understand the deeper aspect of it, because from there comes compassion, from there comes love,
I
from there comes the deeper feeling of oneness,
mm,
regardless. Because it's easy to attend, well, let's take an example of somebody dealing with lepers, all right,
mm,
where most health workers, and it's been an experience of mine, where most lepers will be dealt with at a distance.
mm,
And you can't say there's compassion. They're just doing a duty, to a social duty, that's all. But they would much rather help somebody who didn't have the skin complaint, you know.
mm,
But the point is, God is dressed up in all of those instances as a depth of spirit that sits behind it.
mm,
And the expression of it is just on the surface. It's just the crest of a crest of a crest of a wave that they're looking at. We're all looking at that crest of a crest of a crest of a wave and not seeing the big picture. When you talk of holism, you're talking of the whole thing. And we cannot look at the totality, because we're not equipped to look at the totality until we get away from the limitation of the instrumentation. That's through meditation and so on, basically purifying, clarifying the instrumentation called mind. And when we do that, we get the self-revelation of pure consciousness, which is already there and which gets revealed, as it were, to us. It looks like opening the curtains, it's revealed. Yes, okay, in a sense, it was already there. It's not something to get. So I think that's important because it also has a practical dimension. And here I'm suggesting, if you're a Jesus, you'll have all the social components necessary. You'll have compassion.
mm,
You'll have love. You have no discrimination between the lepers and others. But behind it, you'll see the perfection of, in Jesus' language, the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven was there. And be ye perfect as your Father in heaven was his dictum. Then that has a transforming effect,
mm,
because the perfection then starts coming through, and we can call that spiritual healing, if you will. So that's another added dimension. That's true a holistic outlook. Holistic outlook from a material point of view is there's only one matter and there's only one energy.
mm,
From a mental point of view, there's only one mind.
mm,
From a spiritual point of view, there's only one spirit.
mm,
And when that oneness of spirit is truly understood, all the other things disappear, go away, by the way.
mm,
Just as if I go into a deep sleep, what became of the dream? What became of the waking state?
mm.
Dementia is only in the waking state.
Well, yes, but in Lewy body dementia, you also have very vivid dreams. People act
Sure,
out their
because
dreams.
whatever happens in the waking state filters through, no doubt, and formulates that, yes. But we, from a waking state, say it was only a dream, and we dismiss it as an unreality. But the criteria that applies to it, namely time and space and motion and activities and causation, it's all there in a waking state as well. So it's there in a waking state, it's there in a dream. The only place where it's completely absent is when you go into the deep unconsciousness, which is called a deep sleep or dreamless sleep. The
Mm,
only thing you can say about it is it felt peaceful. There was a peace afterwards.
mm,
But all of that, so that is why in dealing with these three states of consciousness, universal appellations are given. In other words, it is Vishwa that rules over the dream, over the waking state. It is the same entity performing that role. And it is Hiranyagarbha, that is the golden womb, that rules over the dream state, because it's cosmic mind operating over its outputs. And then, of course, in terms of dreamless sleep, it's just the shining one, is consciousness being unconscious in a sense, because the pure consciousness itself is standing as a witness. And when these three states are gone, there's no witness. We can't call it a witness anymore then. All we can
mm,
call it is existence, consciousness, and bliss, even that with an apology, to say these are not qualities, these are actualities. So the view is that is the world. How is it that we see it differently? Because we take the apparition to be real. Regardless of how we see it in a general way that everyone else sees it, or how we see it differently.
Mm.
And if there was if we had that area of the brain that controls sight, visibility, if that is in some way damaged or defunct and not operational, then our world is seen very differently.
Mm-hmm.
Seen in inverted commas, understood, interpreted, very
Oh,
different.
even seen.
Yeah. And if we had supposing we had additional faculties, such as X-ray vision, I'd be complimenting you on your bone structure.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have it.
Mm.
So we are constitutionally, dimensionally deficient. We can only see certain things suitable for an interpretation, which gives us a function.
Mm.
And when any of these gets disturbed, we'll see things differently, no doubt.
I think one of the things, the conversations with you and sort of uh, engagement with Vedanta gives me as a researcher is to dive a little bit deeper and see how can what is how can we what are the research questions that we should be asking in the scientific world to really understand if the two philosophies can come together. And I think I'm a big believer that science is evolving, and we know it's not just a believer,
Well,
but
I
science
think
is
they,
evolving.
yes, I think
And
they
I think
are. There's a man called Federico Faggin, um, who is in fact really the inventor of the microprocessor and the computers,
mm,
and a physicist to boot. And through his own personal revelation of things, he changed from a materialistic point of view, which is typically the scientific approach. From the 17th century, it became an
mm,
orientation toward this world, materialism, and so on. That's lingered on and becomes a kind of badge of honor, if you will, for modern scientists. Um, Although, in some countries, the majority of scientists are theists, and in other countries, the majority of scientists are atheists or
mm,
agnostics. Because there seems to be this separation between material and spirit. This is
mm,
Descartes' fault, that's all, because he went into this dualism. But these kind of scientists are looking more at, and they're just labeling it differently, panpsychism, solipsism, one mind, consciousness as the foundation of being rather than an epiphenomena. You see, if you're a materialist, you have no other choice. That consciousness has to be some kind of byproduct of the brain. And there's no other alternative that you have. But it's because you approach the thing with a bias, not an open mind.
mm,
And it doesn't make any sense that consciousness can come from unconsciousness. It doesn't make any sense that you know that these that something can come from nothing. It
mm,
doesn't make any sense that sentiency can come from insentiency. And so it spills over to the biological world because you have to have an abiogenesis theory, which says that coming from chemicals you can get organic life. And
mm.
nobody's managed to do it, of course. There's the old story, you see, of the scientist approaching God and says, I think we know how you did it. Oh, how did you do it? Well, we set up a laboratory. Yes, good, good. We created initial conditions. Yes, yes. We created kind of simulated lightning and, a volcanic condition, this and that and the other, and the environmental conditions of carbon, oxygen, what have you, That's interesting. And then we took some mud. Oh, wait, hang on. Get your own mud.
Mm,
Because where's the mud coming from? Where are all these conditions coming from, you see? So it doesn't really help. There have been serious attempts to try and do it. Good serious attempts. The Uri experiment, was very exciting. Saying, okay, we produced some amino acids and what have you, but really it's no longer relevant because those were not necessarily the conditions of the early universe. And furthermore, how do you get amino acids to be cooperative and develop into cellular activity? Even at the simplest kind, you cannot do it. It's too complicated. So it still remains a problem for the materialist. It's not a problem for us because we are starting off with a drive, an unfolding consciousness, and which seems to unfold. Why does it seem to unfold? Because when you take this totality and introduce time and space, these dimensions, and then make a space-time from it, well, you're looking at it through a splitting lens. And when you do that, you're not seeing the totality, you're seeing the individuality. It's like trying to understand handwriting by examining it closely and seeing the dots or the pixels. You're missing the whole thing. So, a holistic point of view, the person who really used these terms in this sense was David Bohm, who was a physicist, much maligned physicist, no doubt, but much respected by the same token. And he got his ideas. He really was impressed by conversations with Krishnamurti. Then he realized, and then he used language such as, implicit and explicit. He made these two distinctions. There is something that is implicit that rises to the surface and becomes explicit. That's the world we have. And the whole thing is a holistic thing. You deal with things from a holistic point of view. Now, this is catching on more and more, as it must, because firstly, it's common sense, but also it's nothing new. It's just a rediscovery of these old investigations and truths that came back thousands and thousands of years ago from what we call the rishis, who themselves were scientists in this sense. They examined the external world and collectively found, oh, it's a changing thing. There's a term for it. It's called jagat, the thing that's always changing. And it didn't take them long to think, if you observe something changing, there must be something that is changeless. What is that? That's the inquiry. We won't find it in the external world because that's a changing thing. We won't find it in the internal world either because that's also changing. Because the brain is changing, the mind is changing, the thoughts are changing, feelings are changing, opinions are changing. There's a whole changing thing. And there's a whole arrival and departure lounge going on. So the whole airport of incomings and outgoings with no announcements. And then what is behind that? Well, you can access that through techniques. More than introspection, you go into inspiration derived from meditation. And from there you get the answer, there is one stable, changeless entity from which everything else must be coming. And there's a kind of border. So how does the changeless get into the changing? How does the being enter into becoming? Well, you can draw if you want to put it as a graphic, you can put a little dotted line there, a kind of border. And that border is made from three things: inertia, electrical energy, and gravity, actually. And it requires time and space to understand it and become the field for it. And as soon as you understand that, everything else falls into place. So I think we're give it another 10, 15 years, the whole of the scientific outlook will change from an emphasis on materialism to something much more than theism. It'll come to a deeper understanding where the foundations of these questions provide the foundational answers to.
Yeah, I think for that, I think we need a confluence of different knowledge systems. And I think we're
Well, yeah,
either
I mean, one of the problems is in the area of science, there's so many specialist areas.
no, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's specialist areas in science, but I think even fundamentally, science is one knowledge system. I think
Yeah.
that's something that we all
Well, this
in
newfound kind of scientific investigating the consciousness
Mhm.
is more a multidisciplinary thing. So
Yeah, I mean, but it's
you're
still
doing
scientific. It's
yeah,
still scientific. Yeah.
yeah, you're
I
doing
think
away
there's
with the specialist area. Let's take, for example, um, the assumptions that are behind many areas of science which are not proven, which are just theoretical, just mathematical and therefore symbolic, and yet accepted in a factual way.
Mm,
In discussion with some people say, of course, there's a multiverse. No, I don't know that. Can you prove it? And there's a great scientist, George Ellis, who happens to be a South African, who has collaborated with Stephen Hawking and others, and Roger Penrose and so on. Well respected, but he's saying, let's stop all this nonsense. This is metaphysics, it's not physics. Who said that there was a multiverse? You can provide a theory for it, no doubt, but theories are just theories. You need something more than that. And they're just ad hoc ways of getting around problems. Science used to be different. Science used to be the suggested solution to a problem. And then is a theory, and that theory has to be proven or falsified. So it has to be engaged in laboratory work. Today you can
mhm,
upgrade it. You can make computer simulations as long as you don't fall into the trap that the
mm,
computer simulation is reality, because you can change parameters and get a different result. Depends
mm,
what parameters you plug in. But then it has to be endorsed by other parties. It
mm,
has to be reproduced a number of times. It has to be proven mathematically, and it
mm,
has to be proven in terms of its predictions.
mm,
And it all is all around observations. And if it
mm,
doesn't fit the observational evidence, you can't just put something ad hoc in there and say, I
mm,
have a theory. Because that has now resulted in millions and millions of theories, literally, all with the idea, oh, well, one day we'll get a kind of Nobel Prize. As long as we produce academic papers on it.
yeah.
So there's a kind of industry now in the academic world of producing academic papers, all linked to funding and a number of other things, resulting in many thinking scientists saying, enough of that, the well has been poisoned, because the outcome of that is nothing creative happening.
Mm,
The outcome of that is that nobody is thinking outside the box, so to speak, and
mm,
producing novel ideas, which themselves may well provide good solutions. And historically, we've known that that works.
mm,
Einstein, for example, and Marie Curie, and all those great people who had the who were not bound by finance and not bound by opinions. Although they were there, the great scientist Boltzmann, for example, he was ridiculed by his peers because he suggested there were little tiny sub things called atoms. And they said,
mm,
oh, we don't want that old Greek Democritus idea.
mm,
And then the year of his death, I think even the month of his death, if I'm not incorrect, out of frustration, he had already a depressive tendency, but he hung himself. He
mm,
couldn't stand the ridicule of his peers. And yet, many of his ideas, most of his ideas, are considered something like a genius.
mm.
So thank you so much for joining me and telling
Thank you,
us all
Swamiji.
about this area. It was very interesting, and has the opportunity, gives a person the opportunity for the practical application of not only philosophical principles, but the implementation in terms of service. So,
think it brings a lot more questions to the scientific world, this conversation. And I
yes,
think for me, it's one of those. I think for me, a lot of the learning, even from, I mean, from the Global Brain Health Institute, but also from our conversations, is that science is one knowledge stream. There are other knowledge streams, there are other knowledge systems that are more indigenous. One is, of course, the Eastern philosophical knowledge system. There's others in the world, especially in Africa, in South America, in
mm,
Australia, in Ireland, for example, in
yeah.
other indigenous communities where indigenous communities hold thousands and thousands and thousands of years of knowledge that is certain bound by their belief systems, bound by something different from science. And I think the more colonial view has been um, to look at one stream of knowledge as
Well,
fact.
I don't think it's any trivial matter that
Yeah.
all our pharmaceuticals, more or less, have their origin in the Amazon rainforest,
Mm, mm, yeah. So
known
there's a
to known to tribal communities.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that's a whole other avenue
Yeah.
of debate and discussion. But now I think the world is definitely, I hope the world is moving towards respecting other knowledge systems. And even us who are born and raised in indigenous communities have been educated in the post-colonial world. And I think there's a lot of unlearning that even we have to do, and which will probably do a lot of good to the world in bringing respect and
Well,
respecting other knowledge systems
well, I
and
mean,
wisdom.
China, for example, holds conventional, what some people call allopathic medicine, along with acupuncture. As you know, in India, and even in the Ramakrishna Mission clinics and what have you, they have Ayurvedic clinics
Mm. Yeah,
along
yeah,
with homeopathy, along with allopathy.
yeah, yeah.
You know, so it's seen to be complementary. And in some countries, in some countries, they would recognize that you can certainly claim medical expenses for homeopathy.
Mm.
But the interesting thing is naturopathy is, for me, is the kind of prerequisite to health, because
Yeah.
not only from a philosophical point of view does it say things are working well except obstacles are in the way, let's remove them. So medical attention is a question of identifying and removing obstacles
Mm.
rather than diagnosing from the point of view inherently if you have a body something has to be wrong, not necessarily, you know.
Mm.
And so we remove that obstacle. And I'd be quite keen for that to work in the area of Alzheimer's, dementia, which says that there are some preconditions that we can make to see how we could avoid the thing in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole idea of modifiable risk factors and that's where, naturopathy or, just the holistic living
Yeah,
of eating right and exercising
yeah,
and practicing mindfulness
yeah,
and changing the way we approach life
yeah,
is comes before we hit before we hit dementia rather
yeah,
than
yes.
after.
Supposing we were to make every single second a joyful moment, a kind of internal rapture, moment to moment,
Mhm.
what would the cellular body look like?
Mm,
With
interesting
that, we'll
question.
leave it. Okay. Thank you so much for your time and your inputs and telling us all about this. All right. Good.
Thank you, Swamiji. Thank you for having me.